So I want to thank everybody for attending this webinar. This is a interesting and challenging time to be working in HUD housing. My focus in the past 25 years has always been the accurate reporting of PHA data for both public housing and voucher program to HUD. And I used to think the transition from the old MTCS system to PIC in 2000 was a challenge, and it's like, man, today I feel like we're standing on the edge of the unknown. So one of the biggest issues that I currently see that when looking at where things are going with HUD and the reporting, one of the issues is 5058 actions that have retroactive effective dates, especially for the voucher program. I see this as potentially one of the biggest areas that we've got to get control of. And so that is really the focus of what I'm looking at accomplishing with this webinar, is to identify the areas that you can look at and try to deal with, we can manage, something we can manage, and potentially reduce the issues that we're facing as we move into 2024. So I'm looking at identifying known unknowns, or it might be the known knowns and known unknowns. Looking at impact of PHA procedures and policies and procedures. We're going to take a look at PIC. We're going to take a look at EIV and what we can do. Known unknowns, we're dealing with HOTMA. We've got changes to the 5058. We've got HUD changing HUD systems, and these are all huge. Now, with regard to HOTMA, the one known is Section 103 that has to do with the over income. This was a PIH notice that was published February 13th of this year and is currently in effect. And so your agency needs to make a decision as to how you're going to handle these over income families. And these are the families that are participant families where their income for a 24-month period exceeds the 50 percentile by two, when you take that number, multiply it by 2.4. And so these are families that you know, your housing agency, one option you have is you simply are going to terminate their tenancy after 6 months. So if that is the decision of your agency, during that 6-month period, that family would continue to pay flat rent. There would be technically no change other than the fact they're going to be paying whatever your current new flat rent is for their reserve period. And then at the end, at the point that they leave, you're going to process an end of participation, and they would vacate from that unit. So during that grace period, there's nothing special that you have to do in PIC or in the future HIP system. That tenant is going to show up as being active as a flat rent tenant. Your other option would be to allow that family to remain in the unit. So if that's the option that your agency is going with, then that family will be required to sign a new lease within 60 days of their 24-month notice. And during that 60-day period, that grace period, the family would continue to pay their flat rent until the lease is signed. And then at the point of the effective date of the lease, the family would pay an alternative non-public housing rent. So this rent would be different. I would expect it to be different than what you're using for flat rent, because this unit at that point in time is not going to be receiving CAP fund or operating subsidy. So your agency needs to look at building that alternative rent. And again, for that family, at the point that their lease goes into effect, you would be processing an end of participation. And at that point, that unit is going to be vacant in your software, well, technically vacant in your software as far as an assisted tenant. and that unit would also be vacant in PIC. Now, we currently in PIC have a unit status for occupied by over income family that is currently being used for small agencies under 250 units that admitted a tenant that was over income. So I'm expecting HUD to come up with a new unit status that would specifically identify participant families that are considered over income. And just guessing, it's going to be the NPHOI for the non-public housing over income family. But again, we haven't seen anything come yet. All right. Somewhat known is the fact that, yes, we have a final ruling on sections 102 income and 103, or excuse me, 104 for assets, but we still haven't seen the PHA notice for these. I was at an NARO conference 2.5 weeks ago, and that was supposed to be something that was going to be published shortly. As of this morning, it still hasn't been published. So certainly be looking for PIH notices coming out on these two sections of HOTMA. Unknowns, they are making changes to the Form 50058. We haven't seen the full list of those changes. We have not seen an updated form. And let's see, this we're in September, and this is all supposed to go into effect in January. So we're still patiently waiting for things. The other unknowns is, you know, HUD's going live with these three major systems on or before 1/1 of 24. So we're dealing with Nspire, HIP, EVMS. You know, and what we don't know is how well are these systems going to talk to each other? No clue. We have no reports that are available that we can test to see how these systems are going to interact with each other, how they're going to speak. We don't know. The other unknown is, will HUD maybe pause FOS and CMAQ reporting for 2024? Again, don't know. I haven't seen anything on that yet. So what can we do to prepare better for 2024? And like I said, I'm looking at how can we minimize retroactive re-exams, both interims, annuals, whatever. So we need to, you know, it's a good idea for us to take a look at what procedures do we have in-house? What are our policies? Yeah, we can look at, you know, is our data in PIC clean? Is our data in EIV clean? These are the areas that many times cause us to have to do a retroactive action. And then how do we implement HOTMA changes? We're looking at that too. So when you're looking at your procedures, your policies, you know, it's a good time, you know, if you're looking at these things and you ask, well, why do we do the things we do and the way we do it? And if your response is, because that's the way we've always done it, I think it's time for review. I love new employees because new employees always ask, well, why do you do this? Because that's the way we've always done it. And it's like, no, why did you do it? So it's really good to look at, why do we do the things we do? Who is the user of the information that you have, and asking them, is this really what you need? How do you need it? But it's a good time to review these things, and does it make sense? And the other big one is, what circumstances require a 5/8 with a retroactive effective date? Why are we doing it? Are we sitting there with a bunch of stuff on our desk and we're the ones holding up the show? Or what are we waiting for? Are there other ways we can get the information that we need to verify so we can continue moving on? Now, with regard to HOTMA section 102, one of the goals of HOTMA was to hopefully reduce the number of interim re-exams required. And so HOTMA is saying, hey, unless there is a increase or decrease in the family's adjusted income of at least 10%, if it's less than that, you don't have to do a re-exam. And the other is, if the family is within 3 months of their annual, and they have a change in earned income, they're saying hold off until the annual. Don't do an interim and then follow it up with the annual. Wait for the annual, because they're saying we want to allow the family to keep their earnings. Okay, so looking at PIC, the areas of most interest on my side of the house is the re-exam report, HQS for the voucher program, invalid tenant ID report, and the possible duplicates report. So these are 3 or 4 reports for the voucher program, 3 for public housing, that are within your control to take a look at and make sure that your agency is clean. So when we're looking at that re-exam report, this is a monthly report in PIC, easy one to generate. And I think, Dakota, you'll make the bites and pieces document available to people too. That document gives you instructions on how to generate these various reports. So what you're looking for is you want to look at the re-exam report. It ages your data. The oldest stuff is on top. You don't have to print this report. Just look at it and maybe print the first page. But you're really looking at any re-exam that's 12 months or older. And 12 is technically fine, 13 is fine, 14 is where you get into trouble with both public housing and the voucher program. So you could have reasons why you haven't completed a re-exam. It could be that you're evicting this family and you're not going to be doing it, and that's perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned. But it's knowing that's the reason for the late re-exam. Otherwise, there isn't really a good reason, because it should be done, and it should have been done long before it shows up on this report as 12 months and older. So take a look at that. HQS report for Section 8. Again, this report it's a monthly report. It ages your data, puts the oldest on top. And you should look at this report and just look at what's 26 months and older. If you're not using Action 13 HQS update only to submit your most current inspection dates, chances are you're going to have data in that 26, 27, 28 month play zone. And that's fine, because you're letting it ride on an annual. You'll let the HQS update off the annual. And so you're looking for the outliers during the year. If you're coming up to your fiscal year end, you want to be looking at anything that's 25 months and older, because your fiscal year end, those will show up as 26 months. So just be aware of how that report works and how your agency, what is your procedure in your agency as far as how you're reporting your HQS. The invalid tenant ID report. This report does have a relationship with EIV. Most of the tenants that are on this report are also going to be in EIV as having discrepancies with regard to their social security number, last name, first name, date of birth, and whether or not they're deceased. And so this is an easy report to run for all of these issues. Doesn't give you any answers, but it at least identifies the family members where there are discrepancies. Anybody on this report does cause issues with your 5058 data being blocked or not being accepted by PIC. So it's important to have this clean. And you should be looking at this on a monthly basis, would be suggested. The possible duplicates report. This report, you're looking at whoever the losing PHA or program is, the side that has to do the correction in PIC. If you're on the gaining side, you suffer a little bit, but you should verify that the family member in question is actually living in your jurisdiction, and you should it's always helpful to contact that losing PHA or program, because it could be in-house, that they remove a family member that is in the wrong family. Is normally what it comes down to. But this is another important report to keep clean, and it's in your control to do that. So if you have any questions about this part of, the PIC part, just send that through the chat, would be helpful. So now we're going to look at EIV, and I'm going to fess up front, I don't have access to EIV, but I do a lot of reading about EIV and follow up on webinars. So I do know what the requirements are. So the areas of most concern for EIV, and again, we're looking at issues that will cause your agency to potentially submit a retroactive action versus a current month action. So again, these are the reports that we're going to be looking at in EIV. And they are listed under the verification reports as far as your menu option in EIV. And that red line is not to be real specific for deceased, but I don't have access to EIV to get nice clean screenshots. But deceased is real important to make sure that you don't have anybody listed on that report. So it's just basically, generating these reports independently and looking at the data. So again, the identity verification report is a report that HUD says you're supposed to be looking at monthly. And you may require the family to have to bring in different documentation if you're having if names or family members are coming up as discrepant. The fix is you have to process a correction 5058. And a 5058 being marked as a correction is the only way it's going to get corrected. And you have to use reason code 2 or 4. So it's a non-income change, and you're either 2, you're pointing at the family, or 4, you're looking at yourself. I don't care, pick one. And nobody else really cares other than the fact that we have to have it submitted this way. That correction has to go from PIC back to EIV, back to SSA. From SSA, gets verified, comes back to EIV. And if it's clean, it ends there. Okay, but that's the way that the documentation flows. The data flows. So when you're under the identity verification, there's a EIV pre-screening deficiencies, where they're looking at the failed SSN check. And that's really where, yes, it's the SSN, it's the name, it's the date of birth, those issues. And then there's a failed effective date check, and that usually means you got an overdue re-exam. And so you want to look at those. And then you've got the SSA screening deficiencies. And I looked at the description of the error description and corrective action, and I'm going, I'm not sure how helpful that is going to be for anybody, but take a look at it. When you're looking, again, under identity verification, they have a tab for pending verification by HUD, and anybody listed on that particular tab, there's no action required by you, the PHA. So these are tenants where you submitted a corrective 58 to PIC. The EIV picked it up, and they have now sent the data to the Social Security Administration, and it's a wait and see. And so the Social Security Administration, there's some items that they will potentially verify weekly, monthly, quarterly. So if it's, like I said, if it's sitting under pending verification, that's a good thing, and you just wait and see. Now, our favorite IVT, the income validation tool. This one causes more headaches for people. It's good to know how this tool, what is it looking at, what isn't it looking at, okay? So it is going to exclude any income from a full-time student, a live-in aid, any youth, and any of your tenants that are paying flat rents. They are not going to come up in this tool. And the other thing is they're knowing how to drill down. There are 3 different drill downs. So basically anything that I think it's colored blue is going to be a link. And so you can drill down through EIV to find out why they're saying that there's a discrepancy with regard to the income. What's the source of the, who the household, who's the household, who's the member in the household, who's the employer. So know how to drill down in EIV, because there's a lot of information. The other interesting thing is when you pull up the unreported income by household report, I circled down here at the bottom, there is a filter, and it defaults on $2,400 as an annual income difference. So if your agency, if you run this report and this report is just forever long, I would strongly suggest changing the filter to, it's like, okay, put in $10,000, put in $15,000. You want to get the big fish. So use this report to make it a more manageable report for you to begin to get a handle on your tenant data and look at trying to figure out, what did we do wrong? What did we miss? Why did we miss it? So you want to be asking those questions. How did we calculate the income? What on earth were we looking at? Okay. But again, you as an agency, you're the first to find out that somebody lost their job. EIV is the last to find out that information. And EIV is the first to find out that somebody got a job. You're the last to know. And so you're going to have information potentially, especially when somebody loses their job, that that data is not going to match up with EIV. And so, but you need to know that, and you need to keep track of that, so you're not having to do it every month. Now, the other big issue with IVT that I see is understanding, how does IVT calculate income? IVT is sourcing data from the National Directory for New Hires. So they're starting with that number, they're adding unemployment, and they're adding Social Security Administration income for the most current quarter. And then they're looking at the prior quarter for the same information, multiplying times 2. Well, that can be potentially a whole lot different than the way you're looking at how you annualize income. And, and so, because we look at HOTMA now, and HOTMA says, well, for an annual, you're going to use 12 months worth of data. You're going to, to analyze your income. So we've got an apples and oranges scenario going. And so it's just understanding and knowing, how did they calculate? How am I calculating? Did I really miss anything? Yes, there's a discrepancy. Who's got the discrepancy? Okay. And of course, the timing of, at the time you used EIV to source income, you did not have your most current quarter might not even be what IVT is going to use as the prior quarter. So there's a huge timing issue going on, and it's just being aware of that, so that you're not jumping through hoops that are unnecessary. You document your tenant file. You just make sure that things are looking right. The other issue that you can have with IVT is, what income codes did you use versus what income categories is IVT using? So even though you could have the exact correct dollar amount, because you used the wrong or a different income code, it's going to be a discrepancy as far as IVT is concerned. So know what you're looking at, and to identify really where the differences are. So another report in EIV is the multiple subsidy report. And this is maybe similar to possible duplicates in PIC, but not necessarily. Okay, so the couple of the big areas that are similar, this first one where you've got a household member who's residing in a unit, but also shows up as a head of household. So if you have a family where a family member is now leaving and going to become a new head of household, you've got to process 2 different 5/8s. You've got the new head of household record, and the prior family, you have to remove that new head of household from that family because they're no longer in there. and submit an action for the prior family, the losing family, okay? And so both of those scenarios will show up in both EIV under, you'll see it under multiple subsidy, but you'll also see it in PIC under the possible duplicates. The one you will not see in PIC is this next one, where the family is using a Section 8 voucher in a multifamily Section 236 property, project-based property. And in this case, though the unit address format that is used between the 5.8 and the 5.9 has to be set up exactly the same. So you need exactly the same format. So you start with a 5.9 and you use that address setup on your 5.8. So make sure it's the same, and then you will not have a discrepancy on this issue. And then the third common one is shared dependence between families. I.e., you got two families and you got the child showing another family member showing up in both because they flip families. So the losing family, you need a 5.8 on the losing family, you need a 5.8 on the gaining family. So just remember, when you've got that scenario, you're looking at two actions, two families that you have to keep cleaned up. Report in EIV. Again, this is one you're supposed to monitor monthly. And it's a good one to just keep tabs on. If you have any tenants that have their citizenship pending for their immigration status. The other is if you have any family member, any household member with a PIC alternate ID, they will show up on this report. And again, it's good to monitor this report, because if you have an ineligible non-citizen, that family would normally require prorated assistance for this mixed family. But just be aware that if you have an ineligible non-citizen, that person most likely will not have a Social Security. Always show up on this report. So this report may not necessarily be clean without anybody on it, because you might have that scenario. The deceased tenant report, generally speaking, anybody on EIV's deceased report is also going to be in PIC, noted as deceased under the invalid tenant ID report. This report again should be reviewed monthly. If you have a single member family, you will submit a 5.8 end of participation for that family. If it's a voucher program, the effective date of that end of participation will be the last day of the month that the person passed away in. So if they died on the last day of the month, that will be your effective date for the voucher program. Public housing is there's a little bit more leeway, because you do not have legal access to that unit. So I suggest following multifamily and make that effective date no more than 14 days from date of death. If for public housing that unit you end up being involved in probate, this is a scenario where you can vacate that unit, and I'd be requesting your field office for status of vacant HUD-approved litigation. Haven't seen that one used yet, but that's the way I would work with that. If you have a multi-member family, you should submit an interim and make it effective, if possible, the first of the month following date of death, and remove that deceased family member from the household. So if the sooner you can get, and that's for both public housing and Section 8, if you have a multi-member family. So the voucher program really needs to review this report before they start processing HAP for the next month. The voucher program cannot make subsidy overpayments on behalf of deceased tenant or tenants. And if they do, they have to recoup those HAP dollars. So I don't, if you say, well, it took, we didn't get notification for 3 months. I don't care. You're going to backdate that end of participation in the voucher program, and you will recoup HAP on a single member family where there was a deceased person. So notification from whatever, it is not the same as what's the date of death is what you need to be functioning off of. And again, if you have any questions about, and this is called the quick and dirty on EIV, by the way. So now, so looking further, how do we transition from PIC to HIP? And I hope everybody's aware that, HIP, HIP is the new PIC, and it's supposed to go live on 1/1/24. And so I'm sitting here now in September, almost in October, knowing I'm really not sure how this transition is, how this is going to go. So what, and I've tried, and HUD field offices don't know much more either. So I'm suggesting at this point that PHAs wait to implement the HOTMA elderly disability allowance, the medical threshold, disability threshold for at least 2 months, and after HIP is fully functional and ready to accept data. Just simply because we don't know. We don't know how this is going to play. And so, so I do realize that you as an agency have to update your policies effective for 1/1/24 for these changes. But then it's like there's a pause that says, yes, but we are not going to implement the change. We're going to tie it to HIP. And we're going to make sure HIP is fully functional, because the electronic record that's going to be submitted to HIP is totally different than the format used for PIC. We can't go, oh, well, we'll just do what we've been doing and we'll just submit it to PIC. Won't go. Besides, even if we did format them the same, these allowances are different, and PIC's going to throw them out because they're not going to update PIC. So the thought is, let's tie the implementation of these HOTMA changes to seeing HIP fully functional, and so and give it 2 months after that to give you a chance to process your 5/8 with those future effective dates. The other that the Minnesota field office brought up to me is like, you know what? I'd also be looking at when's the PHA's fiscal year end. So for anybody with a 3/31 fiscal year end, I'm going to say you're not going to implement any of these changes until April 1 would be the earliest, because they're saying don't try to do this before that fiscal year end. And 6/30, not sure. We'll see. By that time we'll have a better idea of how things are flowing and what HUD is doing with FOS and CMAP and all those things. So to recap, and I'm saying on or before 12/31/23, let's get your annuals current, any of your interims, clear off your desk, clean out your drawers, do the stuff that's just hanging around that needs to get done. Make sure that your HQS is current. Clean up any of your invalid tenant ID issues, possible duplicates in PIC, and get through those reports in EIV as much as you can. And what else do I have? And review and understand the HOTMA sections 102, 103, 104. And again, we're technically waiting for a PIH notice for 102 and 104. There's a lot in 103 that, it's just good to read through that, and certainly pay attention to any HUD notifications that are going to be coming out regarding status as far as the update on the systems, and what they're expecting you to do. And with that, if you have any questions, and I know this was really fast and a lot of stuff.
What about those with 930 FYE question mark?
For 2024, I would say by that time we should have a good feel. We get through the first quarter of 24, we should have a good idea where things are going and what's happening with HIP. But HIP has to be implemented before we can implement any of these other changes, because they are not going to update PIC. And so that's the best that I have right now. Like I said, I can't emphasize enough that take control of what you have within your control. But seriously, look at why your agencies are doing retroactive actions. And in all seriousness, going forward into 24, with HIP speaking to EVMS for the voucher family folk or voucher folks, I don't know how those systems are going to handle changes in HAP that get reported as on retroactive 5/8. I don't know how they are going to make those adjustments, and especially where you've got repay agreements in place potentially. I would not be reporting a 5/8 if I can help it. And I would wait until you collected the money and be reporting that as fraud recovery. Otherwise, HUD is going to take that money back from you, whether you collect it or not. So I'd really be looking at why are we doing what we're doing, and is there a better way for us to be doing things?